In a world addicted to noise, the man who masters silence becomes dangerous, not because he raises his voice, but because he doesn't need to. He walks into a room and doesn't explain himself. He listens when others shout. He withholds when others overshare. He moves with stillness that unnerves the loud because they don't know what he's thinking, what he wants, what he'll do. And that, Lao Tzu understood, is power. Not the kind that begs to be recognized, but the kind that cannot be ignored. Silence, he said, is a source of great strength, not passivity, not absence, but control, inner gravity, still water that runs deep and drags fools beneath its surface. Most men today think strength is about dominance, louder words, stronger opinions, faster responses. But real strength lies in restraint. It lies in the choice not to speak when the ego screams to be heard. It lies in the discipline to hold your truth like a sword still sheathed. That is silence, not weakness, not hesitation, but a weapon waiting. Look around and you'll see the opposite everywhere. Men desperate to be validated, to be understood, to be seen. They flood timelines with takes. They speak before they think. They argue with shadows, hoping anyone will clap. But Lao Tzu would have smiled at this circus, not with scorn, but pity, because he knew the man who cannot be silent has not yet met himself. He is still reacting to the world, still tethered to approval, still enslaved by noise. A loud man is predictable. You know what provokes him, what flatters him, what weakens him. But the silent man, he is unreadable. And in that unreadability lies his power. He does not need you to agree. He does not fear your misunderstanding. He does not rush to defend his name because his name was never the point. His path is inward. His loyalty is to the Tao, to the way of harmony, of stillness, of subtlety. And through that loyalty, he becomes immovable.
You see, silence isn't about saying nothing. It's about saying only what matters. The loud man throws 100 punches and hits air. The silent man waits, then lands one that breaks bone. That is how nature moves. The wind doesn't announce itself, it arrives. The river doesn't brag, it cuts through stone. The tree doesn't argue, it outlasts the storm. Lao Tzu understood that the most powerful forces in this world make no noise. So why should a man trying to build something eternal waste his breath convincing others of his worth? He doesn't. He withdraws, not out of cowardice, but clarity. Because he knows the louder he gets, the more power he gives away. The louder he reacts, the more easily he can be manipulated. And that's the tragic irony of modern man. He believes being heard is the same as being strong. But true strength isn't reactive, it's sovereign. It doesn't need confirmation to exist. The silent man walks differently. He watches what others ignore. He speaks only when the words are heavier than his quiet. He is not in a rush because he knows pressure doesn't come from urgency, it comes from presence. And when he finally opens his mouth, people listen. Not because he's famous, not because he's loud, but because he's rare. In a world drowning in opinions, silence becomes sacred. And that's why most people are uncomfortable around a quiet man. He exposes the noise in their minds. He doesn't give them the dopamine of a reaction. He doesn't participate in the game of status and performance. And that makes him mysterious, even dangerous, because what cannot be read cannot be predicted. And what cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. Lao Tzu didn't write manuals for men who wanted power over others. He wrote for men who sought mastery over themselves. He taught that the Tao, the way, is found not in assertion but surrender, not in speaking but listening. And that's the discipline few ever understand. Because silence, real silence, isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of self. It's what remains when the performance ends, when there's no one left to impress, when your own mind begins to ask, who are you without the noise? Most men don't know. They've never sat still long enough to find out. They're too busy running from themselves, drowning in commentary, mistaking chatter for depth. For the man who embraces silence hears something else, something ancient, something unshakable. He hears the truth. And truth, Lao Tzu said, doesn't need defending. It reveals itself slowly, like the sun through mist. And once it rises, it blinds all lies. That is the path of the silent man, now to shout his truth into the void, but to live it so clearly that the void rearranges itself in his presence. He doesn't win arguments. He makes them irrelevant. He doesn't shout down enemies. He outlasts them. Because his foundation is not built on the shifting sands of opinion, but on stillness, on simplicity, on strength so quiet, it terrifies the noisy.
But here's the thing about silence. It's not just about how you deal with the world, it's how you deal with yourself. Most men think silence is external, but Lao Tzu knew the real battlefield is within. Silence is not an escape from life, it's the entrance into it. Because when the noise dies, you're left alone with the only voice that actually matters, your own. And that voice isn't always kind. It reminds you of your failures, your cowardice, your compromise. It asks you the hard questions no crowd ever will. What do you believe in when no one is watching? What pain have you buried beneath your performance? What man are you becoming? Well, no one applauds. And the reason most men drown in noise is not because they love distraction, but because they fear that voice, that mirror, that truth. But Lao Tzu would not let you run. He didn't teach the Tao to soothe your ego. He taught it to burn away what's false. He taught that only in stillness can the storm inside you be faced, and only through that storm can the real man be born. So the man who embraces silence is not avoiding life. He's walking deeper into it. He's pulling back from the theater so he can confront what's real. And in doing so, he becomes something rare. A man no longer controlled by the opinions of others. A man no longer dancing for praise, begging for love, or chasing shadows. A man who can sit still while others panic. A man who can think clearly while others drown in doubt. A man who can hear his own conscience in a world that screams at him to ignore it. That kind of man doesn't just survive, he leads. And he doesn't lead with charisma, he leads with calm, with grounded presence, with a silence so full it commands attention. And that is why the world fears him. Because he cannot be swayed. Because his values aren't borrowed, they're built. And because no one, not lovers, not friends, not even enemies, can find a hook in his soul to pull him off course. The world cannot control a man it cannot distract. And silence, real silence, is the rejection of distraction. It's not just not talking, it's not performing, it's not explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. It's not needing to update the world on your progress, your pain, your plans. The silent man builds without announcement. He heals without display. He suffers without seeking sympathy. He knows that every time he explains himself to people who do not understand him, he gives away part of his soul. Lao Tzu would say, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." And that wasn't arrogance, it was protection. Because truth doesn't survive in loud mouths. It gets diluted, misused, devoured. But truth, preserved in silence, becomes unbreakable. It becomes a presence, a gravity, a force that doesn't need to shout because it shapes everything around it. And yet the modern man resists this. He wants to be heard before he is ready. He wants to be respected before he has matured. He wants to be followed before he has mastered solitude. He wants to be praised before he has suffered. And so he performs, he posts, he talks, he creates the illusion of depth without ever digging. But Lao Tzu's teachings rip that illusion apart. They remind you that if you cannot sit quietly with yourself, you are not ready to lead anyone. That if your strength depends on recognition, it is not strength, it is dependency in disguise. Silence is the test, the gateway, the forge, because in silence you will confront the void, the ache, the emptiness. You will feel unseen, unloved, misunderstood. And in that pain, something happens. You either crumble or you rise.
You either beg to be heard, or you become the kind of man who doesn't need to be. And that is what makes a man truly dangerous. Not his volume, not his aggression, not his reach, but his discipline, his poise, his self-mastery. The ability to sit in a storm without moving, to endure humiliation without flinching, to love without needing to be loved back. This is what Lao Tzu meant when he said, "Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power." Because the man who has mastered silence has mastered the source of all his reactions. He doesn't snap because someone provokes him. He doesn't chase because someone praises him. He doesn't fold because someone doubts him. His power is not reaction, it is creation. He moves from the center, not the surface. And that center is silent. It is still. It is untouchable. But this kind of silence isn't for everyone. It's for the man who is done performing, the man who no longer wants to be loud just to be heard, the man who realizes the real war is not out there, it's inside. And that everything he was trying to prove to the world, he was really just trying to prove to himself. But once he stops proving and starts becoming, once he trades noise for presence, he changes. Not quickly, not glamorously, but deeply. He becomes someone the world can no longer ignore because he no longer needs anything from it.
So what does the silent man look like in the modern world? He is not what they expect. He does not glow on screens or shout in debates. He walks among us unnoticed, often underestimated. He isn't chasing the spotlight. He's focused on the fire inside. While others curate personas, he sharpens purpose. While others seek followers, he seeks discipline. He is often mistaken for cold, detached, emotionless. But that's only because his emotions are not for display, they are for direction. He doesn't need to speak to prove he feels. He doesn't need to cry to show he cares. He doesn't need to announce his suffering to validate its depth. His silence isn't a lack of emotion, it is the restraint of emotion, the harnessing of it, the alchemy of turning pain into strength, confusion into clarity, longing into vision. This is why people fear him, because they can't predict him, because his energy doesn't leak, because when he looks at you, you feel seen, not for your mask, but for what lies underneath it. Lao Tzu taught that the highest virtue is like water. It nourishes all things without competing. It flows to the lowest places, the forgotten spaces, the humble grounds. And in doing so, it becomes unstoppable. That is the silent man. He doesn't push to the front of the line, he builds the foundation beneath it. He doesn't wrestle for power, he becomes indispensable to it. He doesn't boast in crowds, he transforms them with his absence. He doesn't need to win arguments, because he knows the truth is like water. It doesn't fight, it waits, and eventually it carves canyons. Time bends around the man who walks with silence, because silence gives him patience. Patience gives him vision, and vision gives him legacy.
The world today does not reward this. The algorithm does not promote quiet strength, but history does. Legacy does. The greatest leaders, the most revered sages, the men whose words echo across generations, they were not loud men. They were clear men, grounded, rooted, unshakable. They didn't rush to speak because they knew the weight of their voice. And when they did speak, the world leaned in. Lao Tzu himself vanished from the records after writing his book. No grand farewell, no final speech, just a trail of wisdom left like footprints in mist. Because the silent man does not fear being forgotten. He fears never becoming real. He fears becoming a product of noise, of others' desires, of surface-level approval. That's why he walks away. That's why he withdraws, not out of pride, but preservation. Because the more a man speaks without silence, the more his soul dissolves into the crowd. You ask why this matters? Why it's worth building this discipline in a world that doesn't seem to care? The answer's simple. Because silence doesn't just protect you from the world, it prepares you to lead it. Not with flash, but with force. Not with charm, but with character. And character can't be borrowed, posted, or performed. It must be forged in darkness, in stillness, in silence. That's where the real work is done. That's where boys become men. That's where you stop asking the world who you are and start deciding it for yourself. And if you think no one will notice, you're wrong. They won't understand you, but they will feel you. They will feel the weight of a man who doesn't flinch, who doesn't fawn, who doesn't need their applause to stay steady. And that feeling, that invisible pull, that is the mark of a man who has made peace with silence, who no longer runs from it, but rules from it. That is the man who wins, not the moment, but the years, not the crowd, but the war, not the trend, but the legacy.
So become that man. Not tomorrow, not when life slows down. Now. Begin the hard work no one sees. Sit in silence. Let it scrape away your ego. Let it confront you with everything you've been avoiding. Let it remake you. Because in the stillness you fear lies the strength you seek. The strength to not react, but to respond. To not follow noise, but to embody truth. To not demand power, but to become it. And when you do, when you've learned to walk with silence as your ally, not your enemy, you will find something strange begins to happen. The world doesn't just respect you, it changes around you. People lower their voices. Chaos slows down. Shallow men avoid you. Deep ones find you. Because you become rare. Because you become solid. Because you become one of the few who no longer needs to be loud to be heard. You've become a storm in stillness, a mountain in fog, a force without noise. You've become what every man was meant to be before the world taught him to scream for attention. You've become silent, and in doing so, you've become unstoppable.